As I was introduced, my name is Jaya Helene, and as you can see, and from my voice, I'm from America, and it was my great honor to be associated with Swami Ananda from a very early age. I met him in 1968. Swamiji at that time was living in San Francisco, and he was in the formative time of his life when he was beginning the Ananda Sangha work in San Francisco, and I had the opportunity to take a series of classes from him, and he invited me at that time to come to his flat where there were a few people gathering that were meeting to discuss the possibility of starting some sort of a work. He had purchased some property in the mountains, and he was beginning a hermitage at that point, and later developed into an ashram. And I was very fortunate because he asked me one day, he says, what are you doing with your life? And at that time, I had just graduated from the university. And I said, well, sir, I haven't particularly made a decision yet what I'm going to do. And he says, are you doing anything right now? And I said, no, not really. And he says, good, would you be willing to help me? And the help that he wanted, of course, was he was about to start this project, which eventually did become Ananda, and he needed somebody to go and do some rather menial things up in the mountains to be able to prepare that property. And immediately I said, yes, I'll go. And I looked back on my life, and that was a pivotal moment for me, of course, to say, yes, I would go, because I thought I was going for 1 month, maybe 2 months maximum. And here we are, many 45 plus years later, that I'm still here, serving this work. But I look back on that time, and I wondered, why did I say yes? I had changed my life completely, and there was something about Swamiji, and he was tremendously magnetic. There was something about him that, you might say, attracted me, compelled me, uplifted me. And I'm sure you have probably, I hope you have had the opportunity in life to meet people like that. People who you are immediately attracted to. There's something about them. And we say they're charismatic, but it's something more than that. There's an eminence, you might say, from them. And I'd like to speak a little bit about that today. But I'd like to speak about it, how it applies to us personally. Because as the title of our discourse is today, change your life, change your magnetism, change your life. Now, I came to choose this topic. It was actually a couple of months ago when I was invited by the directors of our local center here in Delhi. They invited me to come, and they said, well, what would you like to speak about? And thinking about it, I chose this topic because I had at that time, a few months ago, there were friends of mine or associates of mine that were having some difficulties in their life. And perhaps this will ring true with people that you know. Have you ever noticed that some people, they have difficulties in life and they take a new start, but then a little time goes by and those same difficulties reappear? It's as if again and again their life arranges itself. Perhaps in this case there was a certain difficulty that these people were having, these persons were having difficulty getting along. They were in a position, a job position, but they had difficulty getting along with other people, and discord had arisen, and it turned out that they needed to shift and perhaps serve elsewhere because of the discord that had been created. But this was not the first time this had happened. And you see this sometimes in people's lives, that they draw to themselves a certain set of circumstances. And finally it creates a situation where they have to change. And they do change, and they get a new start. But a little time goes by, and again, those circumstances come again and again. You see people, they take on a project, and something, after a little bit of time, a certain failure comes to it. And they try again and again, but there's something drawing, a certain magnetism, you might say, that recreates around in their world again and again circumstances. And I was thinking about this in this case, and I thought, what is it? Why are do they not see in their own lives the patterns that they have created for themselves? Well, it was about that same time that I read an article about a book that I've subsequently have purchased and have been reading. And it was a short excerpt from that book that I found very fascinating, because when things happen in people's lives, sometimes you hear people say, oh, it's just my karma. I failed, but must have been my karma. Or perhaps they'll say something like, well, the stars were not aligned right, it was my destiny, or there was my horoscope doesn't allow it to happen. And of course, Ananda would never allow people such statements to happen. He would say, karma, karma, people talk about karma, but who created that karma in the first place? And if you created something, you can undo that karma. So don't let that become an excuse for that. Well, at about that time, I was reading this book, because nowadays, perhaps people don't say karma, karma. They say, well, it's in my DNA. I'm built this way. What else can I do? And this is in modern language for karma, I think. You might say DNA is the modern physical representation of karma. But nevertheless, this book, it's the name of the book, perhaps some of you even have purchased it. It's called The Gene. It's by a Bengali oncologist by the name of Siddharth Mukherjee. And it's an excellent book. I recommend it if you're interested in genetics, that sort of thing. And he makes an interesting point in there that struck me. And he said, you find populations of people. In his case, he studies cancer, diabetes, but he also references alcoholism, patterns in people's lives. And they've discovered that people have a genetic disposition for various diseases. Diabetes is one. If you have a certain genetic predisposition for it, your chances of contracting that are higher than people without it. Same thing for alcoholism. Many cancers are this way, and they're finding that genetically there's many things, perhaps even most things, people's physical nature is there's dispositions. Now the interesting thing is, although there's a large portion of people that may be predisposed to a certain disease, let's take alcohol for example, they may be predisposed to that, but yet just because they're predisposed does not mean that they're going to become alcoholics. Only some do. And because it's a very complex situation, it's not just one little gene, it's a very complex cocktail, you might say, of, if you're using alcohol as an image, of genes that go to predispose one. It's very complex. But yet something seems to be a trigger to turn on those genes that manifest themselves in alcoholism. And what are the triggers? And you find the same thing for many different diseases, many different traits in people. Certain things trigger that. And what they're discovering is that many of those triggers are under the control of people. It's the choices they make in life. That it's not something arbitrary, not something beyond them, but it's rather choices of things that in their daily life, that if they would have chosen slightly differently, perhaps the outcome might have been differently. Then those combination of choices trigger the genes to go into manifestation, into expression. Now I read that, and I thought this is very interesting, because it's not that different when we speak of our karmic predispositions, our tendencies. We all have multiple tendencies, very complex karma, but it doesn't mean that we are victims, or necessarily fate needs to determine that. And this is the point that as I began to read that I'd like to make today, that we have our personalities, who we are, we have a certain magnetism that attracts to us. You can call this karma, if you will, DNA, if you will, that attracts to us certain circumstances, and they are not beyond our control. These are things that we have an opportunity to influence if we understand, and if we make the right choices in life, we can begin to affect our future. We're not the victims of the world's, you could say, circumstances outside of ourselves. And so with that, I'd like to speak a little bit today about how some of those influences manifest from a spiritual perspective, from a yogic perspective, from a perspective of the teachings of our guru in this tradition, Paramahansa Yogananda. This world works according to law. We have the law of karma, basic laws of this universe, but there are subtler laws that are even more, you might say, behind those physical laws that we all know of. Karma, you could say, is simply expressed in Newton's laws of motion. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, there are subtler laws as well. There are, as we know, outwardly, there's the law of magnetism. Things attract. One thing, like you might say, attracts like. And so we find that not just outwardly in these physical laws, but there's also very subtle laws at play in this world. And that if we can understand those, we begin to be able to manipulate those laws for our benefit. Well, maybe manipulate isn't quite the right way to say that. Perhaps a better way to say that, we learn to be able to cooperate with those laws. I have a friend, and I returned, I was visiting the United States. I returned actually only last Monday. And when I was in the United States, this friend of mine, I had a friend, I would say that this friend would be somebody you would say who has what I like to affectionately call commotion karma. He's a person that things seem to be chaotic sometimes around him. Do you know people like that? Sometimes we're like that as well. Something just happens. Well, I was visiting, he's been a long-time friend of mine, and he crashed his car. He crashed his car, and he totally wrecked the car. And so he was now without transportation. And so I happen to have, in the United States, I have an old car, and it's probably got 250,000 kilometers on it. So it's well used, but it runs good. It runs great, but I don't use it very much, but it's an old car I had in the United States. And so I decided, well, I'll just give him this old car. And I gave it to him. And he was very thankful for that. But I gave the car to him, this car, a Toyota car, which was running perfectly. I gave him the car. Now, it was perfectly in perfect outward shape too, except for one big dent in the back, which he had made when I last lent it to him. But I gave him this car, and so he took the car, and within 2 days, it developed an oil leak out of the engine, one of the seals, the oil engine seals, and it was leaking oil onto the pavement. And I thought, oh, what happened? He says, I don't know, I didn't do anything. And so he took it to the mechanic, and the mechanic, oh, okay, and it cost some hundreds of dollars to fix it. He went in to pick it up. As he was driving it away from the mechanic shop, the mechanic started it up, showed him how it ran perfectly, no oil was leaking, everything was good. While I was there in the mechanic's yard, steam started coming out from under the hood. And the radiator had broken, and right there. Now, I just laughed. I think what the car was, the car knew I had given it away to another person, and it had been under my aura protection, you might say, and all of a sudden this fellow took it, and it rebelled. Well, I think we know people like that. And there's a story from the life of Paramahansa Yogananda that was told to me by Swami Kriyananda when he was a disciple of Yogananda's in his ashram. He said when he was there was another disciple, his name was Bernard. And Brother Bernard was charged with going to the local city, Los Angeles, and buying various supplies and so on, and doing very errands. But he had the unfortunate circumstance that he kept having small accidents. Little things would happen to him. Well, one day he had another one of these little accidents, and Paramahansa Yogananda told Bernard, and called him aside and says, Bernard, you need to be more careful. Well, Bernard said, but Master, these things that are happening to me are not my fault. They're just happening to me. For example, the last accident that happened, my automobile, it was parked, and somebody ran into it. I was not even in the car. And Yogananda didn't say anything other than, you need to be more careful. So Bernard, heard that, he went away, and he said, he just doesn't understand. He's just unrealistic. He just doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. I had nothing to do with this. And he was like this in his mind. And then he said, well, but he is the guru, so maybe there's something to what he's saying. And he began to look at his own life. And he began to notice that in his own life, he says, well, actually, I am a little bit uncareful in other aspects of my life. I don't pay attention to everything in life, and I know my accommodations here are not very orderly. And so he began to self-examine, and he began to notice that he actually wasn't careful in other aspects of his life. And he said, I'm going to change that. I'll become very careful. And so he ordered his life, became very careful, and immediately the accident tendency went away. Nothing happened again. Now, I'd ask you, was that a coincidence? Because that's probably what most people would say. It's merely coincidence, these types of things happening. But it's not coincidence, because what we do is that we actually attract or repel, sometimes we say that too, we attract circumstances to us that are in harmony with our own vibration, with our own magnetism, and we attract that to ourselves, those things that are in harmony. You could say that we open up a window in our magnetic aura that allows certain things to be attracted and come toward us. And the question for us is to be, what allows that? How do we change that? And how can we protect ourselves for when things, you might say, when we develop these holes in our magnetism that allow things to affect us? To be aware of it is the first thing that we need to understand, is that we are magnets. It's as if you were like myself, when I was a child, I was given a magnet, a horseshoe magnet. I had such fun because I remember taking it to my school where we had a large box of sand. There where the plate equipment was, and I would take the magnet and I would run it through the sand. I don't know if any of you ever did this when you were a child. You'd run the magnet in the sand, and it would have these little filings, these little metal filings onto the magnet. Well, in a sense, we are like that. We are like that magnet running ourselves through our daily life, and as we do, we begin to pick up certain filings. Other people whose magnetism is slightly different, they pick up other filings. But each of us are like that. But in reality, this image of a physical magnet is not so far removed from what is actually happening. We are magnets because we are essentially bodies of energy, bodies of electricity, bodies of electrical forces. And we know from when we went to school that wherever you have a flow, a directional flow of energy, you are also going to have a magnetic field around it. Isn't this so? If there's energy in movement, there's going to be an electrical field. And there is energy in movement within our bodies. And this is the basic principle upon which the science of yoga is based, is that there are currents of life force moving within this body, and subtle pranic currents moving within this body that in the movement of the currents within us create a magnetic field that is attractive, that attracts, or you might say repels certain circumstances to us. And there is this not only physical energetic currents flowing within the body, but there's also much more subtle currents as well. And perhaps even more subtle is thought itself, because thought too is a form of energy. There's a story in the autobiography of a yogi, which I noticed many of you had raised your hands of having read that book, where the guru of Swami Sri Yukteswar, who was the guru of Paramahansa Yogananda, his name is Lahiri Mahashaya. And Swami Sri Yukteswar, as a young man, when he was but a disciple of Lahiri Mahashaya, he found himself very, very ill for a long period of time and had lost tremendous amount of weight. And he went to his guru to see if the Lahiri Mahashaya would be able to help him. And we went to Lahiri, and upon seeing Lahiri Mahashaya, he says, "Sir, I've been very ill." And Lahiri Mahashaya notes it. He says, "Yes, you've lost lots of weight. But," he says, "perhaps tomorrow things will be better." And Sri Yukteswar, hearing this, of course, felt that was the Guru's blessings on him. So he went home. And the next day he comes back and he was feeling quite well. And Lahiri says to Sri Yukteswar, he says, "Oh, I see you're much better today. You have invigorated yourself." And Sri Yukteswar says, "No, Master, it was you. It was your blessings that healed me." And Lahiri says, "Yes, maybe, but these things, you're still delicate and frail. Who knows what will be tomorrow?" And so Yukteswar, hearing that, he went home, and then the next day he just immediately felt ill. Came back to Sri Yukteswar the next day, and he was just on his, barely could come into the ashram. And Lahiri looks at him, he says, I see you've indisposed yourself again today." And he says, No, Master, I went home, and I felt ill. But yet, he went home, and then he began to think about it. What it was, we have a computer. Oh, there it goes. He began to realize what Lahiri had told him, was telling him, that it was through his own suggestion, the Guru's suggestion. It was his mind itself was attracting that, because his mind, he thought of himself as being well. He saw the Guru was helping him to uplift him, and he felt the Guru's blessings, and he cooperated with that, and he became well. But then again, the next day, when the Guru's suggestion that he was going to be ill, he took that in and allowed his mind to then go down again, and he became ill again. And it was within his control to be able to control whether he was going to be well or whether he was going to be ill. And this is how it is for us as well, is we have this power within ourselves to cooperate with these flows of energy, and it's not something outside of ourselves, because we are part of the larger world around us. It influences us, and we influence it. So the question comes up, says, if we are magnetic, if we are magnetic beings, and if we attract to ourselves circumstances, and if these forces around us are somewhat within our control to some degree, how do we influence that? What can we do to strengthen our magnetism? And what can we do to protect ourselves? And how can we cooperate with these forces in order to live our lives and be more successful in what we're doing in our lives, I think you have to, the first thing I would say is that you need to start with what is most accessible to you. And I think perhaps even before that, the first thing we need to do is to be aware that we are magnetic and that we need to act. We need to actually take action, that we're not the victims of circumstances, but that we can influence this and we can put ourselves into harmony with forces that will be able to sustain and help us. Now, the first thing I would like, in terms of giving some suggestions about this, is the first thing I'd like to say, as I said, is use those things that are most accessible to us. And what might that be? Do those things that are obvious to us. I think the first thing I would suggest is watch your posture. I think this is one of the first things that you can do, and the most easy things you can do to change your magnetism. You notice people that when I first met Swami Ananda, I was a young man. I was in my early 20s, and I had you might say consciously or somewhat subconsciously affected a posture of like that. You see, there was a certain attitude, you might say, associated with that, a coolness that I slouched, and I was somewhat rebellious against the military, standing up straight. And so I had this it was a young person's attitude. And when I met him, one day I was walking, and this at the ashram that he had created. I was walking in the ashram, and I heard somebody coming behind me. And this person behind me, all of a sudden I felt somebody reach around my body and pull me straight. And somebody's hand in the back of my back, pushing me on the lower back, pulling me on the chest, straightening me up. And there was Swami Ananda, who had snuck up behind me because he too was out walking. He saw me, and he came back and he pushed, and he said, "Stand up straight." In that tone of voice. "Stand up straight. You're never going to get anywhere if you walk around slouching." And I have to admit, when I look back on my life, that was one of the best pieces of advice that he ever gave me. Something very simple is to be able to stand up straight. And a bent spine, as Paramahansa Yogananda used to say, is the enemy of self-realization. Because the spine itself, there's energy flows within that spine, and if we keep a good posture, we open up those channels for those flows to take place. And when we have a good flow, with any flow of life force, you're going to create a magnet around it. So I'd like you to think about this. When you leave here today, check your posture. Now, there's something more to it than just physical, because what you will notice, that if you go through life bent over, if you go through life with, you might say, with a downward slouch, you're going to find that you become very undynamic. But if you approach life with a straight spine, with the heart forward, you're going to be much more dynamic in your very physical aura. I have noticed something that when I was a young man, before I met Swamiji, I had lived in a few cities, and the places that I lived were a little bit, you might say, not the nicest neighborhoods. As students, sometimes you can't afford something better, but I lived in some rough neighborhoods, and I noticed, you learn this very quickly, that how you comport yourself with your body there's a correlation between how you present yourself physically and what you're going to attract in terms of the people that you're around. And if you're in a dangerous neighborhood, that if you present yourself as a victim, you're more likely to be picked on and targeted. But if you stand up straight, you project, you look people straight, and you present an aura of that you are in control of yourself. Now, it's helpful, I'm a little bit larger, but that's helpful. People don't bother you. And I learned that very quickly. Well, if you take that principle and apply it to your daily life now, if you present your aura and stand up straight with a good posture, look straight ahead, you're going to present a commanding appearance to life, and you're going to find within yourself, you're going to begin to take on those attributes and those attitudes. So this is a very basic observation that I think all of us should have been made by now. But when I say posture, I mean something more. It's not just the physical posture that we're speaking about. We're speaking about the way you present yourself as a person. Your posture, your attitude, your voice, the way you comport yourself, the way you present yourself, how you look at people. Everything about your physical self has a certain magnetism that will attract people to you or perhaps repel you. One of the most basic exercises that you will find that will be attractive to other people is simply to smile. The difference between smiling and scowling at another person is tremendously, you have different effects. You'll find that you can influence other people simply through simple gestures. Let's take the voice, for example. Again, these are all physical things that we're speaking about. Take the voice, for example. If you want to calm a situation, and this is a yogic principle that Paramahansa Yogananda taught. He said, put your attention here. Speak from the throat, or putting your position at this chakra here, this energy center in the throat, because this is a center of calmness in the body, in the yogic anatomy. And if you project your voice from the throat in a calm manner, from this chakra, you can begin to project a calm aura. If you project yourself here from the heart, what are you project? You're projecting warmth when you project your voice from the heart. Emotion, or also devotion, if you want to project a devotional sound in your voice. If you want to project willpower, you put your mind here and speak with your attention from that point. And you can begin to feel that there's a certain aura of energies are being projected from those centers. So use these physical, you might say these physical tools of how you comport your body. Let's look at a few other things that are physical. How you hold your body, but what you wear on your body. Now, I was also, this was a lesson as a young man I learned from Swami Kriyananda, is when you're young, you're a little bit casual, shall we say, of how you dress. And I looked at it as, well, I shouldn't pay too much attention to how I dress, because obviously that's being attached to these sort of things, and I want to be non-attached. And of course that was a youthful folly on my part. And he said, no. He says, you don't want to, what you wear is an expression of who you are. And if you dress, and so he expected those people that were close to him to dress neatly, dress nicely, and you project something that's attractive to other people, and it'll increase your magnetism. Think of the ways. everything, we are a bundle of magnetic energy that is attracting or the opposite is repelling other people. And Swamiji would often say that one of the things that is the most magnetic parts of the body are the eyes. And of course he would tell people, he says, don't look into other people's eyes, or be careful when you're looking into other people's eyes. Particularly he would tell this to people, when men and women. So he would tell men, don't look into the eyes of women. Because, now he was speaking more particularly, I should say, to the monks. In this case, that don't look, or to women, he would say the thing. He says, don't look into men's eyes. He says, because they're magnetic. You know this. I think everybody realizes this. There's a magnetism there, isn't it? You begin to communicate through the eyes. And he says, so don't. He says, they're very magnetic. He would say another interesting thing. One of the suggestions he says, if you don't look into a person's eyes, some people, if they're always looking to the side, it gives the impression of being shifty. They're not trustworthy. So he would say, look at the point between the eyebrows. Look there when you're looking at another person. Look at this point here. Because there they won't know that you're not looking into their eyes. But also, as we know, this is an energy center, the point between the eyebrows. And you can help, you might say you can help that other person by communicating and putting your energy at that point. So he said he would recommend these very simple things. Another thing he would say, Paramahansa Yogananda would say, he said, and this is, of course, you have to realize he was in America when he was saying that, because the tradition is not so strong here in India. But in America, people tend to always shake hands. And he said he much preferred people, namaskar, but he said to shake hands with another person is you are creating a magnetic flow between you and the other person, particularly if you shake hands and look at another person in the eyes. You're creating a cycle. So he said, be careful. He says, don't do that. If you're not sure of what the other person's magnetism is like. He says, because we exchange magnetism with one another on this very physical level, that a stronger magnet will influence a weaker magnet. Whereas oftentimes he would caution people, because often you have good-hearted people who want to reform somebody else. And let's say in your family, you have somebody in your family who's very strongly negative towards something, and you want to reform them. Well, be careful. Because in your efforts to reform somebody negative, unless you yourself have a stronger magnetism, that person, you might find yourself being reformed by them, but in the wrong direction. So be careful on that. So he would tell people that we need to be mindful of the magnetism within ourselves and mindful of the magnetism in other people, and yet not be afraid of it either. Because ultimately, our magnetism, if we keep our magnetism strong within ourselves, and this especially applies to those people who are yogis, people who meditate, people who practice, your magnetism will protect you. You don't have to, I don't want to overly emphasize and be, that somehow you're going to be influenced negatively too much, but nevertheless, be careful on this. Now, as I said, you start with those things that are obvious, physical, easy for you, but you have to realize also there are more subtle ways that our magnetism influences us and can influence other people. Thoughts, too, are magnetic, and particularly a flow of thoughts. People don't realize that there is a principle that we need to be aware of. As you think, so will you become. And as you begin to think certain thoughts, you begin to put out a flow of life force that begins to attract to you the results of those thoughts. One of the things that Paramahansa Yogananda emphasized, and I found it a very revolutionary thought when I first heard this, he said, thoughts are universally, not individually rooted. Now think of that. What did that mean? Thoughts are universal, not individual. In other words, thoughts exist. We don't create our thoughts. They are out there surrounding us. But yet what we do is, according to our individual magnetism, we attract those thoughts that are in tune with our individual state of consciousness. And so if this is so, then what we can ask the question, if I don't like, or if I don't like what is coming to me, I can change it. Change your thoughts, change your magnetism, and you'll begin to attract different thoughts to you. This is particularly true in terms of artists, composers, people of creative inspiration. According to how your consciousness is, you begin to attract that inspiration to you. Swami Kriyananda was a wonderful musician. He composed over 400 pieces of music, 450 pieces of music. And he was also a world traveler, because he would share these teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda throughout the world in many countries. And as he would travel, he would also often find himself being inspired to compose music. And so he would travel. Let's say, for example, one year he went to Egypt, and he began to think in terms of Egyptian melodies. And when he came home, he would put himself, what must it have been like in ancient Egypt? And he would start writing music with ancient Egyptian melodies that would begin to come to him. And he did the same for Romanian, Japanese. He would be able to attune himself to a certain state of consciousness, and he would begin to attract those thoughts that were in harmony with that. There are two ways, you might say, two primary ways in order for us to create a magnet, or to be able to magnetically strengthen ourselves. The first way, as I've mentioned some of these little very basic things, is to use our own self-effort to create a greater flow of energy. Energy creates a magnetic current, and if we increase that flow, our own magnetism begins to increase as well. But there's a second way to also increase our magnetism. And I think perhaps of the two, this one might be also the more stronger of the two. And that's through association. If you take a physical magnet, if you have a bar of steel and it's unmagnetized, and you want to make it into a magnet, one of the things to do is to run a current of electricity through that bar of steel, and eventually you'll be able to create a magnetic field. The second way to create a magnet is to take a magnet, an unmagnetized bar of steel, and put it in association with a very strong magnet. And that strong magnet over time will begin to transfer its magnetism to the unmagnetized bar of steel. Now, this has great implications for us if we want to magnetize ourselves. Put ourselves in association with those things with which we want to become magnetic with. For example, if you find yourself to be an unsuccessful person, perhaps you've gone into business, you failed, and you failed again, and it just doesn't seem to work for you. If you put yourself into close association with somebody who is a very successful person, business person, you will subtly begin to take on those qualities of magnetism of the successful person. If you're in school, if you're a student in school, associate with the brighter students. It's not that they're going to instruct you and somehow they're going to do your lessons for you, but you'll find that just in the association of the best students, you will begin to take on the qualities of what it means to become a good student. If you want to you want to be a good student of mathematics, for example, associate with mathematicians, people who have that quality. If you want to be an artist, associate with an artist physically. Put yourself in direct physical presence with those people, and you'll find you'll begin to take on those qualities. Well, association is more than just physical. We can also mentally associate with. So that which you think about, if you think about a certain, or you associate mentally and take on mentally those qualities of that which you want to achieve, you'll begin to slowly take on that sort of magnetism as well. And this is the basic principle of course, in the yogic path, in the spiritual path. This is the influence of the Guru, of course, upon the disciple's life, is the physical association, but also more important than the physical association is the mental attunement of oneself with the vibration of that which you want to associate and take on the qualities of. Mentally putting yourself, not physically. Paramahansa Yogananda used to say about his ashram, which was located on a hilltop, and he told the disciples, he says, just being on this hilltop is not going to, meaning just being in this ashram is not going to change you. He says, there are many rats and mice living on this hilltop, and I assure you, they're not growing closer to God. So it's not a matter of just physically being in the presence of that magnet that we want to emulate. We have to be able to attune ourselves, associate ourselves. When Swami Kriyananda was in school, he was in a class that he had to, for whatever reason, he took a class in Greek, learning the Greek language. And but unfortunately, he was not interested in the class very much, and so he didn't attend. And I think some of us who've been students might understand that. And he didn't attend class, but it came time eventually for the exams, and he had to pass that exam. And he remembers his Greek teacher saying, "We're having the exam next week, and I suspect some of you need not even attend." Because then looking very meaningfully at Swamiji. But Swamiji was desperate. He wanted to pass that exam very, very badly. And he was challenged also, and he said, I have to pass this exam. But he had never much attended the classes and gave it no thought. But he said when it came time, it was the week of the exam, and Monday, the exam was on Friday. Monday, he'd pick up the book and he'd go, put it down. Tuesday, the same thing, until finally, it was the day before, he was desperate, and he hit upon a solution. Now, he would use this story because this was one of his very favorite stories, because it was encapsulating of the very principles that he was teaching and what Master's teaching is about. He said, I hit upon the solution that helped me pass that exam, but also influenced him in the rest of his life. He told himself the night before the exam, as he was studying, I am a Greek. And inwardly, he thought of himself as being Greek. And he said, as a Greek, this language is not foreign to me. This is my language. I am a Greek, so this should be natural to me. And he began to think of all the way, and he just associated for that 24 hours before that exam, thinking of himself as what would it be like to be a Greek. And he said, very interestingly, he ended up, part of the exam was that he had to, as he began to think as a Greek, what would a Greek be like? He had, part of the exam was a translation of the Bible, which originally, in its original form, was written in Greek, much of it. And so he picked up the Bible. He knew that he would and he opened it up to a certain passage at random, just to, thought, well, I better study something. And he read a couple of pages in the Bible, which is a thick book, and then he went to the class that day, and it so happened, you can guess where this is going, so happened that that exam was a translation of that very passage that he had opened up at random. And he said, of the class, there was only very few that passed, and he was one of them. And now he said, now was that simply luck? He says, well, if it is, why is it in life that some people seem to be more lucky than others? Have you noticed that? Some people seem to be unlucky all the time, just unlucky. Other people, he says, he was born lucky. Is that just, what is that? Some people are able to attract that. And Swamiji came thinking of that phrase. He developed his own phrase. He said, meet luck halfway. And the principle he was expounding with this Greek lesson was, I am a Greek. But if you want to become something, if you want to change your magnetism, what is it that you want to change your magnetism to? If you want to become a success, you want to be a successful businessman, you want to be an artist, I am an artist. And if you can imbue that attitude from the inside, you begin and think of yourself even outwardly is that way. You begin to take on those qualities. There's a famous motivational speaker years and years ago who used to say, if you want to be enthusiastic, act enthusiastic. If you take on the form of what it is that you want to become. Now you might say, well, that's hypocritical. That's not, I'm just acting. I'm not really that, am I? Well, if you say I'm not really that, then you're not. You see, you have to overcome that resistance and assume it. Now, this is not false. It's not that you're being untruthful. You're putting on an attitude, and you find that you become it. Little by little, you begin to take on those qualities, and you begin to absorb those qualities. And this is a principle of magnetic attraction. You begin to take on that. This is the principle of how a true guru teaches a disciple. It's not through lessons or outward instructions, although that's a little bit there too, but it's an exchange of magnetism, and it's the disciple whose responsibility is to attune oneself to that magnetism by opening oneself up to be able to receive that, putting oneself in a mental alignment, spiritual alignment, emotional alignment with what one wants to become in one's own life. A story from the life of Paramahansa Yogananda was that he wanted a portrait painted of his Param Guru, who was Lahiri Mahashaya. And he contracted a artist to come and paint. And the man produced a painting after some period of time. It was quite a long time it took him. And he looked, and when Yogananda saw the painting, he said to the artist, "How long did it take you to become an artist?" And the tone of it was the man was offended, because he suspected that Yogananda didn't approve of his painting. And the man said, 20 years. It took me 20 years. And Yogananda said, 20 years? 20 years? It took you 20 years to convince yourself that you could paint? Well, of course, the conversation wasn't going too well, but the man said, I'd like to see you do it in twice that time. And Yogananda said, give me 2 weeks. And so the man stomped out. And Yogananda took this as a challenge. And so he went to the art supply store, he bought the supplies, and he began to got a canvas and he began to paint. And no, that wasn't right. And he did it again. But he put himself mentally, he said, I am an artist. I am a painter. I know how to do this. You see, and he attuned himself to that, and he began to draw inspiration for that. And finally, he painted, and he painted. And 2 weeks went by, and he covered the painting as they do with a cloth. And he invited the artist back, and he said, oh, and the artist came, and he said, oh, what can I do for you? He says, I just wanted to show you something. What? And then he lifted up the cloth, and he showed the painting, and the artist said, oh, who did that? He says, well, I did. And he says, it's much better than mine. And you can see, he was able to draw those thoughts, those impressions. And for ourselves, this is the potential that each of us have as well, is we have to attune ourselves to that and say, I am a Greek, I am an artist, I am whatever it is that we aspire to. We begin to draw that to ourselves. And we begin to magnetically begin to create you might even call it a force field that begins to draw those inspirational thoughts to us. Now, this is something that each of us has the potential to do, because we remember our part, we have two parts to play. The one is to put ourselves into association with whatever it is that we want to attract into our lives. I suspect the most easy, when most people think of that, they think materially. Well, I would like to be a little better off. That's usually what people are thinking first. I want to be prosperous. I want my needs fulfilled in life. This is our potential. There's nothing wrong with that. But we have to have success thoughts, being able to think of ourselves that you are that already, because that potential exists within you. And then do your part to be able to open the door for those thoughts to come in. Don't think of yourself. You should never say, I'm poor. Because that's not you. You probably just as well, you probably shouldn't say you're rich either, because we're none of these things. We're infinite. We have infinite potential. But draw to yourselves by doing your part of putting yourselves in mentally doing the effort needed to be able to draw what it is to you, by associating with that. If you can, put yourself in physical association. But one final point on that is most people are in this regard an example of one of the disciples of Paramahansa Yogananda, like one of his disciples who went to Yogananda and said, Master, why can't I find God? And Yogananda told him, he says, you have him already. It's only the thought that you don't that is keeping him from you. And the disciple then said to Master, he says, well, if I wouldn't have God, just if I said if I did have him, I wouldn't have him just by saying that. And Yogananda said, well, you see, you've answered your own question already. You said you wouldn't have him. And so consequently, because that mental thought is that I, in this case, as the disciple in the spiritual sense, I'm separate. He was separate. But if we can overcome that, we find that no, I have him already. I have whatever it is that I'm aspiring to. It's with me already. Now, when I look back on the life of Swami Kriyananda, he passed only a few years ago, but I was, as I said when I started, it was my great good fortune to live with him. and be in his presence for well over 40 years. And people have often asked me, what was he like? What were some of the qualities that most defined him? Now that's somewhat of an impossible question to answer because you could pick anything, really. He was magnetic, as I said. But there was one thing that he had an attitude, a certain attitude toward life. He was a renunciate, his Swami. He was a renunciate, but in the true sense of being what a renunciate is. It's a renunciation is not of necessarily outward things. True renunciation is a renunciation of a sense of I, ego. I am the doer. I possess all this. He did what was appropriate outwardly. He wasn't a wandering sadhu. He lived in this world appropriately, but there was no sense of I. But then, at the same time, he was tremendously engaged and enthusiastic in whatever he did. He approached everything in life with 100% energy. And that, of course, was what was the secret of his magnetism. He was magnetic because he was energetic. And not just physically, because in his older age, his body, you might say, it didn't cooperate with him in his latter years of his life. But nevertheless, he was still tremendously energetic internally. And that, of course, created a great magnetism and why people were drawn to him. But he expressed that energy in a very positive way. And one of his mottos in life, it was carried him through his entire life. He said, say yes to life. Say yes to life. One of the reasons that people don't acquire what they really want in life is because on some subtle level they're blocking it. They're saying, no, I can't, I won't, or it's impossible. Say yes in every moment of your life. And if you have that positive attitude, approaching life with that spirit of yes, yes meaning I accept whatever comes, it's good. I embrace life. And there was never any sense of saying, no, I don't want it. Everything that came to him was positive. He accepted it, and it was his to deal with. And many difficult things came to him. I mentioned his physical body. He didn't resist it. He said, this is the body, okay, I'll deal with it. Other personal problems came, yes, I accept it, I'll deal with it. And he was embracive of life, and in that way he created a positive flow. But what do we often do? There's a mental part of ourselves that says no. We look for problems, yes, but no, I don't want to. I block it. I can't. I won't. There's resistance. And if we can turn that resistance, that resistant problem-seeking attitude into one of saying, yes, I accept what comes to me in life, I will deal with it, a tremendous flow of energy is created in our life, and we find we become very magnetic, and we begin to attract to ourselves those things that we need in life, those things that are necessary for us, and those things that will be fulfilling for us in life. They begin to come naturally. Try to remove that blockage that is so often there, just underneath the surface. And immediately you notice that you ask people to do something, that unwillingness to do what is necessary in life, that unwillingness to confront problems in life, that unwillingness to accept whatever it is that comes to you in life. Overcome that and say yes, and you'll find that in every moment of your life, yes, I will, yes, you'll find that then things naturally begin to come to you, and your life is enriched in that way. Now, I'm going to conclude with one final suggestion here. And I represent and have been a practitioner of these teachings of Paramahansa Yoga for many years. And this practice of yoga is, in essence, yoga itself is an essence of learning to become magnetic, learning to magnetize, because we're speaking outwardly of many of the things that we can do inwardly, but yoga itself is a study and a practice of learning to magnetize oneself inwardly. And if we learn to be able to become aware of the life force moving within the body, it's inside of ourselves that we can truly begin to create that magnet, not outwardly, but from within. Paramahansa Yogananda was an exponent of the teachings of Kriya Yoga. And many of you have heard of this, and these are, if you read his book, Autobiography of a Yogi, you can learn more about that. But Kriya Yoga is the techniques and the science of learning to magnetize the spine, learning to magnetize the energy flow in the spine. I spoke about learning to keep a straight spine, good posture, so that that flow of life force is moving in the spine. If we can learn to create a magnet by magnetizing that spine, we learn that we can begin to attract those things that we need. Now, when we meditate, of course, is what Paramahansa Yogananda, he was an exponent of encouraging people to meditate, of making their body dynamic energetically. If we begin to energize the spine and create a magnet there, a very interesting thing begins to happen. That magnet of the spine begins to attract all of that life force that is within us that tends to go out into the world, out into the senses, out into restlessness, out into tension, out into mental agitation. We begin to withdraw that life force back into the spine, and we begin to create a very powerful inner force and a centeredness. Now, when we think of a yogi, we think of a yogi who's still, who's peaceful, who's not disturbed, who's calm, who's centered. And the secret of this is learning to be able to withdraw in a very natural way all of that life force that is going out into the world outside of ourselves. And so if we approach becoming a magnet from this inner side, we also realize that as we begin to withdraw that life force that is scattered, we begin to develop a great deal of concentration. We begin to focus our attention. We begin to draw that life force to a point that where we can apply it to whatever it is that our need is in life. So if we want to be successful, most people are unsuccessful because they're not focused in their attention. They're not able to concentrate their energy in a particular direction. But if we can be able to withdraw that life force back into the spine, we become a master of ourselves. And once we're a master of ourselves, we then have the ability to apply ourselves to whatever it is that we need in life. And we begin to attract it. We think we have to go out, and this is the most interesting thing that I've noticed in the practice and the study of yoga over these decades. When I came onto this path, I had the approach that I needed to, through my self-effort, I needed to go out and acquire, in this case, peace, calmness, happiness, joy. These were things that were outside of myself that I needed to find and gather to myself. If I wanted to be successful, I needed to go out and find success. This is how we approach it. If I needed to be prosperous, like money, for example, I need to go out and find that money and bring it to myself. And as I've been studying these teachings and practicing these teachings over this lifetime, I've come to the realization it's not so much that at all. It's creating a flow of energy within ourselves, and we attract these things. They come to us. We don't have to go anywhere. We have these things right now potentially within ourselves, and they come to us naturally, in the right way and in the right time. Whenever I went out and tried to find it on my own, it seemed to be the wrong thing at the wrong time. And it just created commotion in my life. But as you become centered in yourself, you begin to draw these things naturally. And you don't have, it's with ease that life begins to come to you. And this is what I saw in the life of Paramahansa Yogananda. This is what I saw and directly experienced in the life of my teacher, Swami Kriyananda. His life was one of perpetual ease. Now that doesn't mean there wasn't tremendous struggle, but inwardly he was still. He was peaceful. He had a sense of joy. In the latter part of his life, he was, like I said, his body had betrayed him a little bit because he laughed about it. It was like a used car that had all the parts replaced at one time or another. And but yet he was inwardly joyful. And he told us, he says, Jaya, remember this. It's not enough to give other people the teachings. He says that's not enough. What you need to do is you need to give people bliss. You need to share bliss. And he meant this not just in a formal situation like this. He meant this in our relationships with one another. We need to try to give bliss to one another, give joy to one another, give peace to one another, give calmness to one another. And you'll find that in the giving of these things to one another, you begin to take on those qualities. So again, if you want to be magnetic, share whatever it is that you want to be magnetic about. So if you want to be prosperous, share prosperity. Become an instrument for prosperity to other people. If you want to be an artist, let your life be an expression of art by sharing it. So be a channel for whatever it is that you want to have for yourself. Don't acquire, you might say, for yourself, because then you might say it's a dead end. That energy, that flow of whatever it is that you want needs to pass through you, because magnetism is the result of a flow. It's a flow of life force. It's a flow of energy. And when you can create that flow, you begin to create this field around it that begins to attract you whatever it is that you need, whatever it is that you want to create for yourself. Try it and see. Now when I'll bring you back, we're going to take a little question and answer session here. Start with those things that you can easily control in your life. Pick a few. Some of the little things that I said. How do you hold yourself, your body, your posture, your smile, your face, your disposition, your attitude, your voice? Take some of the easy things and see if you can change them. And see if, don't take what I say on belief or faith. Practice and see for yourself if this is true or not. And then, secondly, that's something you can do right away. Then you take the easy things and then you go a little bit more subtle. Secondly, choose your environment or your associations wisely. Now I said to associate, and I meant that with other people, but the larger implication of that is the wise person is somebody who is wise about the choice of their environment. And if you put yourself in a positive environment, you'll begin to attract. Put yourself in an environment that will be in harmony with what it is that you want in your life, whether that's people, whether that's something outward, whatever it might be. Pick your associations wisely and try that and see if it does not make a difference in your life.
Thank you so much, Jayaji, for such an incredible talk, very engrossing, eloquent, and educating. We got some really practical tips, and we are thankful for this to you. Now, Jayaji will take a few questions from the audience. If you are willing, kindly raise your hand.
Yes, sir, in the center there. Now, you don't have a microphone. Ah, there's one going back. So speak. I'd like, it's not just that I would like to hear the question, but speak loud enough so that the audience may also hear what you have to ask.
Yeah, good morning, sir. I have two questions actually.
Let's start with one.
You mentioned that we could project emotion and devotion when we focus at this point at the throat.
Heart. No. The devotional part is from the heart.
Okay. And if you want to project willpower, we should focus on the point between the eyebrows. So if you could just explain that a bit more.
Okay, now I think you all heard that question. Sometimes, let's say with the voice, for example, voice is a vibration. Voice can carry meaning on a very subtle level. Voice can carry power. Voice can carry, it carries a vibration. Now, what is the quality of that vibration? And if you're wanting to influence other people, perhaps you're a manager, and as I use the example, these centers, in the yogic tradition, there are various centers in the body. We know of chakras, centers in the body, and each of them have certain qualities. And the chakra that's associated with the throat, the Visuddha chakra, is one of the qualities of it is calmness, a power that comes there when one is awakening that center. And so if you speak with a sense of projecting from that in your voice, you can induce a sense of calmness in your voice, and you can make your voice calming more easily than if you're randomly using your voice. And so you can try it sometimes. Speak if you're in a situation that needs to be calmed, try to speak from this center here. Now, I mentioned the heart. The heart, this is universally, people know that love is associated with the heart. That's why it's associated with devotion. But the powers associated with that Anahata chakra there are those qualities of life that are associated with heart qualities. Embraciveness, love, kindness, compassion, empathy, those types of things. But of course I mentioned there's two sides of that, because our heart in a disturbed state is emotional. And so you don't want to project from the heart if you're in an emotional state, because that'll carry in. We know if somebody is upset, you can hear it in their voice, the fear perhaps, or emotion in their voice. But it's also can be used for devotional, the positive side of those qualities as well. And so you can speak. They even say if you want to convince somebody of something, speak from the heart, and they'll know sincerity. You might say comes from there. Now, of course, here at the point between the eyebrows, this is the center in the body associated with concentration. It's all it's the highest evolutionary point in the frontal lobes of the brain, but it's also associated with willpower. Notice people when they want to very much do something, they tend to even knit their eyebrows and they put their attention instinctively at that point. Well, if you speak to other people and you're wanting to convey a point with strong force to another person, try to project your voice, your thoughts, but also here we're speaking of the voice. Project your voice as if you're simultaneously projecting from that point in your point between the eyebrows, and your voice will begin to carry a certain power with the will. Now, I mentioned these upper three. There are lower three too, but we'll leave those aside because it's better to just think in terms of these upper three. Use the microphone so that way everybody can hear. And me too.
I want to live in the harmonious environment and always try to those who are associated with me that they should go for it. And really, I found that sometimes it becomes very difficult, so much difficult that you are sending good vibrations, you are putting your always on Shiv Netra, but still I fail to understand how to make the atmosphere.
Well, you have to. This is common. This is common. We find ourselves, our life situations, our karma, our situations, put it into sometimes into environments that are disharmonious, and we don't like that. Of course, our first responsibility, of course, is to be harmonious ourselves and to be an influence of. To be able to influence the environment to conform to our vibration rather than to ourselves being subjected to the vibration that we don't like. But this is not a failing on your part. This is the situation that we find ourselves, so it's your particular challenge. But realize that, as I mentioned, it's not uncommon that we find ourselves in a situation that is beyond our ability to positively change, because it's stronger than us. We don't have the power yet to be the dominant force to be able to change that. In the meantime, what you have to do is you have to find an environment. If you can put yourself in an environment, if you have the option to choose an environment that's harmonious, then obviously that will strengthen you in your harmony as well, in your ability to be harmonious. But you have to start with being harmonious inwardly, and to be able to, in your case, it would be able to protect yourself from the harmful, disharmonious vibrations that are around you. And this is the other side of magnetism. I was emphasizing more magnetically affecting the world around us, but also sometimes the world's magnetism is stronger than ours. Think of all the things, the negativity that there is in this world. We can't always protect ourselves. I don't have time to go into this extremely, but to illustrate this, but one of the things that I remember Swamiji saying, he says, if you can't change your environment, you're stuck with the situation. He says, pray for other people. Pray for those people around you. Don't resent them. In other words, don't be negatively reactive to them, because and when he said to pray for somebody, it wasn't a sentiment, because what he was saying is, to pray for somebody else means that you are not being passive and a victim. You are taking action in the way that you can. Now, if there's other things you can do positively, outwardly, fine, do that as well. But if you can't, let's say you're caught in a situation where that's not allowing, by praying for them, you are saying, I am going to do something positive to be able to help this other person. And you become an actor rather than the recipient who's just suffering from the consequences of the environment that you're in. So you don't want to be passive. That's what I'm saying. Don't be passive, but you have to find something positive that you can do that's appropriate. And so Swamiji would often say, if you're in a situation like that, he says, and you cannot physically do something, you can't remove yourself from that situation, but yet you have to do something, and you have to do it inwardly. Pray for those people. Mentally project, I'm using prayer here in the broadest sense. Mentally project a positive vibration to other people, and don't be reactive to it. Don't allow yourself to become angry, resentful, frustrated, all of those things, and which you will be if you allow yourself to become a victim. Be positive.
I think we are running short of time. We can take only one more.
Related to the same topic,
Please, mic. You're not audible here.
Artist is also in the same situation. I mean, disturbed by the environment and cannot be in peace all the time. So, what should an artist do?
Well, obviously, again, it's very similar to the answer that we just gave.
Yeah.
You have to do what you can. We have to, but when we find that life is assailing us, the hard thing about that is that life assails us and we find that we become a victim of life, and we begin to take on that attitude. And what happens if we allow that if we allow ourselves to feel a victim, what happens? We begin to become resentful. We begin to become angry. We begin to feel frustrated. We feel our ability to do something in life is blocked, and that we begin to lose hope. All of these things begin to happen unless we are able to somehow positively do something positive with that for our own. We have to, maybe the best thing we could do in a moment is simply to endure that situation, but we have to find some way we can act to help that situation, or help ourselves at least, to do something positive. And so don't allow yourself to become angry about it. And the way to do that, how do you not become angry when you're being assailed? You have to do something positive. And this is, again, I mentioned prayer for another person, thinking, being an instrument for something. Whatever is flowing through you, whatever you are allowing to move through you, emotionally, spiritually, you're going to take on those qualities. And you don't want those qualities because they're not attractive. You don't want to become an angry person. You don't want to become a frustrated person because they're unmagnetic. And they're not going to draw to you what you really want, which is something much more elevated than that. So I can't tell you specifically what you should do in your situation, but every moment, all of us, in every moment, it's always right now. Now, there's future and past, but we always live right now. And in any moment, we have a choice. And that choice is to either be looking upward toward the light, or to be resisting it and moving away from it. And in every moment, you either face what you're confronted with, or you turn your back to it. Swami Sri Yukteswar said, remember, everything in the future will improve if you make the right effort now. And we only have now, right now. What can I do What can I do to say yes? What can I do to say that's going to make this situation better right now? Even at the smallest. It's a direction. We put ourselves doing something positive right now, and in the next moment, do it again, and again, and again. And slowly we create a directional movement of life force, a directional movement of thought. And that directional movement of doing something positive every moment, one after the next, will begin to create an attractive force that will begin to draw to it better circumstances. Everything in future will improve if we make the right spiritual effort now. That's all you have. That's all you can do is make the right effort now. And what is a right? Maybe I'm going. What is the right effort? Because people ask, what's right action? It's that action that will take you in the direction of freedom from bondage, freedom from ego.
Thank you. Now we'll break for tea. Tea and snacks, they are available outside, and 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 they are available